The Chicago Bulls have been up and down for the last 3 years. And while a lot of the blame does go to the players, a lot of the blame goes to the front office, and some of it, of course, goes to the coaching staff. But on today's episode, I'm going to talk about how much has Billy Donovan held this team back, but almost also how much has Billy Donovan been held back by the team's roster construction. We'll talk about all that, plus Zach LaVine still being snubbed in All-Star voting, and preview tonight's game. We're going to get to all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. I want to start off talking a little bit about the coaching, right? I want to talk a little bit about Billy Donovan. Now, I have had an episode over on Locked on Bulls within the last week where I said, maybe Billy Donovan deserves a little bit more credit, right? You look at Billy Donovan in actually changing and adapting the system from one year to another. You look at how the Bulls have changed pace, how they've changed the style of play with the threes, even though it's not necessarily been the best, right? Like yes, we live it by the three, we die by the three. More recently, we started doing more where our three ball isn't falling. We actually attack the paint a little bit more. So the Bulls are still developing and evolving and trying to find the best balance between heavy three-point shooting and when those shots aren't falling, what then does your offense look like? Right? And I gave him a little bit of credit that repairing the relationship with Billy Donovan. With Zach LaVine, he has, right? But one of the things that I want to talk about, because so often we do, I think, some fans, right, overlook the impact of coaching. I think there's also some fans put too much emphasis on it being the coach. For example, and I'll explain this a little bit, right? I think that there are some segment of basketball fans that look at what happens on the court and just says, oh, well, that's just the players. They just should have shot in that situation. Why didn't he take 15 more shots? And don't really look at the system, the plays that were ran, right? Look at how they were designing things and scheming things down, right? Like, for example, or do you have a point guard that's in the attack? Is that part of the plan whereas players are moving without the ball, right? Some, people look at that type of thing. And I think that, they blame that a little bit on players. But then I think also there's a segment of Bulls, of fandom, generally in basketball, that when things don't go wrong, they say things like, well, why didn't the coach have them prepared? Why didn't the coach do this? Why didn't the coach do that? Like, for example, when the Bulls, with turnovers, when the turnovers are very high on the Chicago Bulls, I didn't really blame that on Billy Donovan, mainly because I highly doubt that Billy Donovan has a single play in his playbook that calls for the Bulls to turn the ball over, that calls for the Bulls to make a stupid pass, right? So some of that's on player execution. And it really becomes, you got to look at the trends, right? You got to look at really sometimes not even live in game. You got to go back and look after the game to see, okay, what was the scheme versus what were the players, where they messed up in that scheme, and thus it led to a broken play, right? And I say things like this all the time where a coach could have a perfect game plan, but if the players can't execute that game plan, then that's not on the coach. That's on the players' lack of execution. So that balance between those two things is really one of those things that it not to say that it takes a trained eye, but you got to really try to dig into the weeds on what was the coaching, where did the coaching fall apart at, versus where did the players fall at with their execution and maybe with their skill, right? And so I initially came into this episode wanting to talk about how much has Billy Donovan, how much is he limiting the ceiling of the Chicago Bulls team, but then in me, again, trying to be objective and looking at things that goes on in a full picture, I felt like that may be an unfair angle to take on it, and ask it more in this sense, right? Is how much is Billy Donovan limiting this team, but also how much is Billy Donovan being limited by the roster and the direction that this front office has chosen? And I think that's where the conversation is. Shay asked a great question on the voicemail. He said, are the Bulls showing us who they are? Are they showing us who they are led by? And he was more so talking about Billy Donovan. But I think we also got to put in the fact of they are also led by the guys who put this roster and collection of players and the coaching staff together, and that's the front office and Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley, right? And the thing in being fair in this evaluation that I wanted to look at is the Bulls have always had a very, very weirdly constructed roster, right? You look at the team last couple of years, right? They were this team that were, well, not last year. Last year they fell to 21st defensively, but the 2 years prior to that, we had been able to stay in the top 5 and the top 10 defensively, even though we didn't necessarily have a team full of great defenders, right? We had Alex Caruso, which was good. We had Drummond for 2 of those seasons, which was really good. We had, Ayo Dosunmu, and at times we had Javonte Green and Derrick Jones Jr. here. But then look at the starting lineups that we had in those time periods as well. Kobe White was in there. Zach LaVine was in there. Some DeMar DeRozan, who's a really bad defender. Patrick Williams, who I went in on last night, who's gotten worse defensively every year of his career. And so much like players can be limited by coaching, coaches can also be limited by the construction of their roster. And I would say this as well, the direction of their roster. And that's one thing that I do think has impacted Billy Donovan a little bit, right? Much like we talked about how the Bulls said that they wanted to get younger and more athletic when they had Fred Hoiberg, and then they went out and got a roster and put a roster together that was not that, right? Billy Donovan is a coach that has worked with a varying degrees of different type of rosters. He's had young athletic players. He had older players that have to use more pick and roll. He's had that. He's had varying degrees of success. And I know a lot of Billy Donovan's detractors, they like to bring up, well, he couldn't get it done with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. How is he going to get it done with this team? That means he's a terrible coach. And there's some validity in that. But I also think when you are missing things such as size and depth, and while we look a lot on Billy Donovan for the small ball, like, let's really look at it and look at the roster that we've had. For example, had a Montez. He left a comment earlier this morning that before I started recording, he said, I want to see more of Jalen Smith and Nikola Vucevic together, which I can understand that desire, right? Like people who wanted to see Andre Drummond and Vooch together more. But then you got to realize, like, okay, but then who's going to give the other big man depth? At that point, you're then playing P. Will, Torrey Craig, who's out. You're playing one of those guys as a small ball center. So once again, the front office has decided to consistently not value size on this roster. Even for my Bulls fans that say things like P. Will should be a 3. Who's going to play the 4, right? I disagree on that. I think P. Will can be 3 or 4. He's not going to do either effectively over his career. The numbers have stayed the same regardless. But with all of that said, it is what it is there, right? That's a story for another day. That's a different set of trauma. That I think it's a fair question to ask. Could Billy Donovan be better if we had a more balance on the roster? Meaning, what if we did have some more shooters? What if we did have better on-ball defenders? Right? What if we did have an actual rim protector, a rim protector that we've been missing literally since Billy Donovan took over this team, right? We didn't have that. Even Andre Drummond isn't a rim protector. He's a really good defender, right? And his on-ball defense was a version of rim protection, but we didn't have like that rim protection that you look at players who are just they're gonna keep players from getting to the rim, right? So there's that part of it, right? And then you also look at now Billy Donovan, as much as we blame him for the small ball, which is still valid to a degree, how many guards do we have on this roster? Did Billy Donovan choose this roster, right? And then we can get into the conversation over, of course, Billy Donovan's rotations, how he takes players out when they're hot, how he lacks calling times out. He doesn't challenge things at times, right? That's on him as coaching. And so the question that I then have, and like I said, I presented this, is that, all right, Billy Donovan, let's say that he does limit the Chicago Bulls ceiling. Cool. Because he's not a perfect coach. He's not a great head coach at all. He's a coach that can be situationally good. I think that's the final phrase that I've landed on with Billy Donovan. He's situationally good depending on what that coaching situation has available for him. He can get some things out of that, right? Again, got to give him credit. We actually changed our system. Got to give him credit for a team that was top 5, top 10 defensively, didn't necessarily always have the best defenders, right? And the Bulls over the last 20 games are actually 15th in defensive rating. Shout out to the Bulls doing that. Let's see if they can maintain that. They may get more wins if that's the case. But Billy Donovan is a functional head coach, right? But if you're looking for a coach that you can throw anything at and he's going to get something out of, right? I look at Spoelstra as a coach like that. You look at what he's been able to do with players that were either undrafted or second-round picks. He's been able to do some really good things with that. Greg Popovich is another a coach that really gets the most out of any players that he has, right? He's that. Mike Dangold, somebody who actually was under Billy Donovan, has really developed into a really good coach on how he balances and uses things. Even when you look at when they were missing Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein, how they had no size, but they were kind of able to figure out enough to keep winning at a really good rate, right? Billy Donovan isn't that coach, but Billy Donovan is the type of coach that if you can give him some good ingredients, he can make a solid meal out of, right? But if you're looking for it to be elevated, right? If you're looking for you to give him scraps and he to turn it into this amazing dish, he's not going to be able to do that, right? And so when you look at who the team is led by, right? Which go back to Shay's question a couple of days ago on that voicemail. Are they showing us who they are led by? Yes, I think they are. But it's not just Billy Donovan. It's also the front office. Now, I would say this, if the front office goes out, which they don't seem to be, Billy Donovan's going to be locked in here. If they were to go out and get a marquee head coach, whether that we know they're a marquee head coach when we hire them or they end up turning into that over their Bulls tenure, of course, we can have a different view. But Billy Donovan isn't doing this front office any favors by the roster that they put, making it look any better than what the sum of the parts are, right? I guess is the way to say it. But then you have to also look at things with Billy Donovan like the lack of development, right? Now, is that because the players that AK drafted just aren't that good? Or is it because that Billy Donovan, because of the direction of the franchise, forcing or wanting to be a team that goes for every win rather than focuses on development, is that why the development is taking a backseat, right? Did the front office know so much that, hey, we aren't going to expect development out of our head coach that we went out and built a player development department? Again, something that I think only 5 teams in the league have, whereas a lot of Bulls fans are kind of criticizing the Bulls for just starting their player development department when not a lot of teams have that. Assistant coaches are the heads of player development on most franchises in the NBA. So it's just a question, and one that leads, at least me personally, to doubt a lot of, again, the direction of this franchise, which keeps being the overarching thing that I'm doubting about this team is the direction. Because every time, right, you look at something, yeah, you can look at coaching, but what coach is going to be able to make so much better? Like, I'm not saying that there are coaches that are going to either be able to develop this team better. There are some coaches that can get this team to more wins, right? But again, those coaches come so few and far between that you can't expect just that to happen. But again, Billy Donovan doesn't get a pass for what he's done as a coach either, where he lacks as a coach. Because even if you are trying to win every game, Billy Donovan hasn't done that great. And again, the way that he manages rotations, the way that he pulls players out when they're hot, the way that he doesn't adjust to what other teams are doing. So even if you are in a win now set and you aren't developing, you're not excelling at that. If development is the focus, we all know Billy Donovan isn't excelling at developing and putting these young players in. For example, the last game, we were out of that game against the Pacers, right? Now we ended up getting back in and it made the discrepancy look a little closer, but that should have been a game where the fourth quarter could have went to Julian, Dalen, Modest, right? That these guys could have developed and grown a little. So that's the thing. Like, it's just a conversation that I wanted to have and present. And again, like I say with everything, I'm not here to tell you guys how to think. I'm here to present the information, the facts as I see it. And then you guys can tell me how you feel about it. It's a living conversation. Let me know how you guys feel, whether it is in the voicemail or whether it's in the comment section. If you guys want to leave a voicemail on it, 773-270-2799. With that said, though, I want to get into the next topic on today's episode, and that's that Zach LaVine has been snubbed yet again. He continues to be snubbed. The new round of All-Star voting came out with a top 10 in each position group, and guess what? Oh, my God. Once again, we see it that Zach LaVine is left out the top 10 of All-Star voting yet again, right? And it should be no surprise, right? 1-to-1, it's not going to change a whole hell of a lot, but I do take issue with some of the players that are listed above Zach LaVine. When you look at the top 10 guards in the Eastern Conference, LaMelo Ball, who's scoring at an amazingly rate, I can understand that. Donovan Mitchell on the best team in the NBA per record right now. Dame Lillard on a good team, right? And he has the history of being an all-star. Jalen Brunson on a really good team. Trae Young, popularity, like Trae Young gets that TikTok crowd in. Tyrese Maxey, Cade Cunningham, Jordan Poole, Darius Garland, Tyler Hero. Out of all of those names, right? And I could even make a case for Zach LaVine should be above Tyrese Maxey. I could make a case for that. But Maxey, of course, riding off the most improved player of the year, but the Bulls have a better record than him, than the Philadelphia 76ers, right? And you can say that, he's outplaying him to a degree. It is what it is when it comes down to it, but the Bulls record being winning, it is what it is. But players that I can't make it a conversation for, Tyler Hero and Jordan Poole. And I know there are going to be some contrarians that come in here and they say, well, hey, this is why Tyler Hero should be above. Tyler Hero's averaging right now 23.6 points, 5.6 rebounds, 5 assists on 46% shooting from the field. Also, Tyler Hero, known as a three-point shooter, shooting the three ball at a 40% clip, taking 9.5 threes per game. You then look at Zach LaVine's numbers, 23.3 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, 4.5 assists, but his shooting splits so much better than Tyler Hero's. 51% from the field, 44% from three. And then the thing that I'll also point out too is that Zach LaVine this season is a much better defender, a more active defender than Tyler Hero. And you know something else that goes in the to support Zach LaVine should be higher than Tyler Hero right now? I think that is the fact that Tyler Hero is actually playing his position. He guards mainly shooting guards. Zach LaVine is a shooting guard that has been guarding shooting guards, small forwards, and power forwards this year, especially if they're power forwards that play out on the perimeter. Go and look at the positional defensive splits that he's done there. Zach LaVine is guarding more positions than he ever has in his career, and players are still shooting 1.4% better than their season averages when Zach LaVine is guarding them. But Tyler Hero, the players that he's guarding, 2.4% better when he's guarding them than what they do on their career averages. That's what it comes down to. Tyler Hero is guarding straightforward shooting guards. Zach LaVine is guarding a multitude of players and playing out of position, and he's being better defensively than what's happening right there, right? Now, I'm not saying that Zach LaVine is any type of lockdown defender at all, but we've seen it. Zach LaVine is a much more engaged defender, and he's welcoming some of the better perimeter defensive assignments and using his size to do so. Also, the clutch factor is way better for Zach LaVine than Tyler Hero. There you go. Jordan Poole, the other player that's voted above Zach LaVine right now, that in my opinion should have no reason being voted above Zach LaVine. Not only is he on one of the worst teams in the NBA that, yes, got to win over the Chicago Bulls, so there it goes, but he's shooting 43% from the field, 40% from three, right? So that's much worse efficiency than Zach LaVine, and he's only getting 2 rebounds per game, whereas Zach LaVine's getting almost 5. Now, he is averaging 5 assists per game, but Zach LaVine is right there at 4.5. So what are we talking about here? There's no reason why Jordan Poole, of all players, on the worst team in the NBA, should be voted above Zach LaVine. And fan voting accounts for 50% of deciding the final All-Star. What the hell? I get it that it's a popularity contest. I get it that the Bulls haven't been on national TV as much, but come on, y'all. Well, and I'm not saying y'all. I know Bulls fans understand this, right? But the rest of the basketball world has allowed narratives to impact their view on Zach LaVine so much that people are straight up ignoring what should be an all-star season because of the way that the media talked about Zach LaVine this offseason. That is a travesty. That is a slap in the face. That is disrespectful. That is just downright stupid, is what it is. And that's the world that we live in, unfortunately, when it comes to basketball. We see so much that things are built so much around narrative. Zach LaVine is having an all-star season. And whether the NBA realizes that or not, right? Whatever happens there, it is what it is. But I think that at some point, just much like with Kobe White, he should have been most improved player of the year last year. Zach LaVine should be an all-star. And hopefully that the coaches, when they make their decision, that they rectify that, because I hope that coaches are paying more attention to actual basketball than narrative to help somebody like Zach LaVine get in. And I'll get it. If Zach LaVine doesn't get in, it's cool. The way and the state that the Chicago Bulls are in, that's definitely going to play a part and role in it. But you're trying to tell me that shouldn't for Jordan Poole? That's the place that I'm in right now. That's what's questionable so much about this voting right now. And I know I'm standing on my high horse right now defending my guy who's a Chicago Bull, but at the end of the day, man, that shit is stupid. And I'm tired of stupidity reigning so supreme in the game of basketball. That's my opinion. You guys can let me know how you feel on it down below. The Bulls do have a game today. They're facing off against the Washington Wizards, which is crazy enough because we just talked about Jordan Poole, right? And they're doing it at home this time. Now, the Chicago Bulls have, they've disappointed against the Wizards before, right? And sure, I would like to say that this team is looking to get their lick back, but then again, we can't necessarily say that because this is the Chicago Bulls team. Now, we already know that Torrey Craig and Ayo Dosunmu remain out for the Chicago Bulls, which means that we're going to have to step up. Like, Ayo Dosunmu is so important to the Bulls defense. He has consistently been so important to the Bulls defense, right? And the Bulls, while they have been playing some solid defense at times, they're going to have to dig in defensively. They're going to have to execute. Go back to execution, right? Limit those turnovers. You are now at home on your home court. Do you want to let a team with the worst record in the NBA come in and beat you after you lost to them already? I would hope that you don't want to do that. I would hope that you have a little bit more pride about yourself to not allow that to happen to you again, right? Like, you're on your home court now. Get the dub, right? And this comes down to as well, balancing. Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, Kobe White have to be better. Josh Giddey has to be better than what he was last game. We know what these guys can do. We've seen the 4 of these players have it where 3 of those players scoring 20 points. One gets a double-double or something like that, right? Like, we've seen that happening. I have no more faith for Patrick Williams. Maybe this is a game that Patrick Williams steps up and has a great game in, but when it comes down to it, so much of what the Bulls do to come down to those 4 players. And then the contributions that you do good off the bench from Jalen Smith, from Lonzo Ball and what he's able to do even when his shot's not falling. This Bulls team needs to be locked in. They need to be engaged because I tell you what, as we've already seen, the Bulls can get caught slipping against anybody. So let's hope that that's not the case tonight. But overall, that's my time. We'll be live on the channel tonight for the pregame, halftime hangout, and postgame shows, all live on the channel. If you're only a podcast listener, all you get is the postgame show after the fact. Go over to YouTube, hit the subscribe on YouTube so you can be a part of us during the pregame shows and the halftime hangouts. They get a little bit crazy, but it's fun. But thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.